go back to that one room schoolhouse kind of place. I grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money in the middle of freaking nowhere. We had to drive 2 hours to go to a mall. And, I'm now sitting on boards. I was the chair of a board with other marketers like the chief marketing officer of GE and IBM. And you talk about access. I never could have gotten into that room, much less be seen as a leader of a profession by people of professionals of that caliber, had I not dug in and learned what I needed to learn as a speaker
to another episode of Speaking of Success. Today I have the honor of introducing a truly inspiring guest. Carla Johnson is someone who has spent her career teaching people how to think differently. She's not only an author of 10 books, including the standout Re-Innovation, but also a top-notch keynote speaker and innovation strategist. Carla has worked with leaders and Fortune 500 companies, helping thousands rethink their work to make a bigger impact. Her mission is to inspire 1 million people to become innovative thinkers by 2025, which is incredible, right? But what makes Carla special isn't just her resume, it's how she connects with people. Her talks are filled with great stories, practical advice, and a lot of humor. She makes complex ideas simple and shows that anybody can be creative and innovative, no matter their job title or background. Today, she's here to share her insights on how we can all bring more creativity into our daily lives and work. So get ready for some amazing stories and practical tips that you can use right away. Please join me in welcoming Carla Johnson to the show. Welcome. Great to talk to you again.
Spencer, it's great to be with you again. It's been a little while.
It has. So, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, I think there's some global thing that happened pretty big between the last time we worked together.
Yeah, exactly. And that is like this weird time warp that, I don't know, it feels like the year never happened or the 2 years never happened. And and then suddenly
Exactly.
you haven't seen people for ages. It's
Oh, it's good to see you again.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm really been looking forward to this conversation, and I think people have a lot to learn from your experience as a public speaker. So I thought maybe we'd start by taking you back to the early days and maybe digging in a bit to what was your journey into public speaking like? Where did it start?
Well, this is kind of fun timing because I went back to my little hometown where I grew up in the Midwest of America. And I went to a one-room country schoolhouse through sixth grade. And when I went back to visit it, I walked in and it literally is just one big room. But on one side is a stage. And that's where we would do the holiday Christmas programs, the Halloween programs, all these things. And I remember as a little girl, like the angst and the palm sweating and the heart beating that came from having to stand on stage and have all eyes on me. And it was so terrifying. So I find it rather ironic that that is now what I do as a living. But as I went through school and then college, speaking was always something we had to do, and it was probably part of my major. And then when I got into the working world, when you're in a meeting and your boss says who has an idea or who's going to go first, and everybody looks around and nobody wants to make eye contact. It's in those moments that I started to see that there was a real opportunity if I could find my own voice and get rid of the sweaty palms and the, fast heart beating, that I felt that there was really an opportunity. And it was a little over 20 years ago, I left the corporate world and started my own company and volunteered on some boards and things like that. And it was through that networking and connection, I had somebody who asked me if I would come speak to a university class about writing and communication. And I think that was a huge light bulb moment for me, Spencer, because all of a sudden I realized there's two aspects of sharing what you know. The first is like what you know and like what I would draw on every single day. But the other side of it that I think is really an important thing for speakers to realize is how you take what you know and put it into a speech that gets other people as excited and engaged with what you know as you are. And I think that was really a big aha for me.
Yeah, definitely. So that's many different journeys you just covered there from school all the way through college, all the way into work. And what was, what was some of the challenges along that way? Because I think like one of the things that's really nice for people to see or to hear is we're all the same. We all go through the whether it's the sweaty palms or the fast heartbeat, or for me it was the saliva used to disappear from my mouth. I remember doing a job interview, it felt like my lip was sticking to my gum. It was horrible. But so yeah, what were some of the challenges that you had to deal with along that journey?
Well, I'll share two, and one kind of led to the other. And that's it. I'm the youngest of five kids in a family that's very outgoing and extroverted. And so I always had to fight for attention and fight for any space to be heard. And then when I started to speak, that was one of the really, really uncomfortable things for me, is that I would say something and everybody was quiet. And it was such an unusual experience for me. And somehow on stage, I always felt like I was going to have to fight for the space to speak. And I remember early on, I was doing presenting a workshop for a group of about 30 people. And as I stood up in front of the room and everything was quiet, it made me more and more nervous. And I
Yeah,
I started to like sweat, and then like
yeah,
my armpits started to sweat, and I'm trying to hold them down so nobody can see anything. And then I find like I'm talking like a T-Rex and
yeah,
it just became more awkward. And somebody told me after that, like the reason they are quiet is because one, they feel that you have something that you know that they want to hear, that they are listening to. And the second thing that really hit home is that every audience wants to see a speaker succeed.
yeah,
So even if you do get nervous, and there's been plenty of times since then that I've tripped up and gone on stage and a microphone doesn't work. And I think that's been such a hurdle for me to get over, that doesn't make me so nervous anymore, is that things are always going to go wrong. But I think the grace of being a speaker is how you handle them and put your audience at as much ease as yourself, because they don't want to see you struggle. They don't want to see you be uncomfortable. They don't want to see you be embarrassed. And everybody knows if something goes wrong. So have a little fun with it, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, it's great advice. I have spent the last couple of years studying improv. So I've been taking like improv comedy classes. And I think one of the most powerful things it did for me was understanding that when something goes wrong, that's normally the bit that gets the biggest laugh or and it's almost like this process of like, yeah, just accept that things go wrong. Everybody will sympathize with it. And you can actually, well, I guess there's two things. There's almost like that it takes really a long time for the audience to understand something's wrong, but in your head it happens very quick. But then you can have a bit of fun with it. You can actually say to the audience, "Oh, the microphone's not working," or I totally forgot what I was going to say." So you can actually have fun with it in a way. But yeah, it's an interesting journey that we all have to go through.
Well, and I think improv is like such a beautiful thing to study as a speaker, because things are always popping in your head. And I think when you know your content really, really well, and you have that improv training, it's an opportunity to be playful and I think connect with people in a way that we don't always think of as speakers. But I think the speakers who are always the same every single time they present, that's a little, I think perfection is boring, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think a little bit of playfulness and a little bit of, oh, now what was I going to say? Like, were you paying attention to what I said? Because I just forgot. It makes everybody laugh, and I think that's really what helps a message resonate, is the laughter and the emotion that goes along with it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's a process because I think definitely the improv with me was I was like, okay, I want to look at what does confidence mean on a stage where I can't do any preparation at all. I just have to get out of my head, step on that stage and see where it goes. And I think like, and this is something I've heard in a lot of the interviews that I've done, is it's almost like you need to do lots of little things that build this jigsaw of what it means to be a public speaker. It's yeah, like you say, if you just did the same thing again and again and again, eventually it loses its shine.
Yeah, and I think also, like, with what you talked about with improv and being ready for whatever can happen, I think there's this bit of, faith and just relaxation that whatever happens is the right thing, like, that's how it should have turned out, even though if you did the same improv show over and over and over, like many comedians do night after night, it's a completely different show every night, and I think when we as speakers relax and kind of relent and give in, that's a really beautiful dynamic that happens between the speaker and the message and the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so so you obviously like did a number of different things, and how did you then go from there to, you know, or it becoming like something that is a big part of your life, public speaking? Was there like a pivotal moment where that shifted, or was it more like a gradual change?
It was a gradual change, but at the end it really picked up speed. So my background is all in marketing, and that's what I did and what I started to speak on. And it was about 10 years ago that I said, I'm going to speak every single time somebody asks me, like whatever the opportunity is. I wanted the experience, I wanted the exposure, I wanted to network in that way through speaking because I saw it was a really powerful way to meet people who I would never have met otherwise. And Spencer, I think I spoke about 26 times that year
Wow.
on 26 different topics. So that was my first big lesson is if you say yes to everything, like have a very small portfolio of topics that you will speak about that applies to many different situations. So that was a huge learning. And so after that year, I did pull back on my speaking because I felt like I really needed to understand what did I want to talk about. And while I love marketing and I've talked about it for years and still do to a certain capacity, what really got me excited was talking about how people are creative, how people are innovative thinkers, and really looking at how do we bring this kind of fresh excitement to our work, regardless of what our role is in our organization or in our own company. And, I had worked with a lot of engineers. My background, I studied engineering for a couple of years in university, come from an engineering family. And I started to see that there was this beautiful opportunity to tell stories about creativity and innovative thinking to audiences that weren't typical creative audiences. They weren't the designers, the design thinkers, or the graphic designers, or always marketers in that way. And for me, I saw how it could really awaken this kind of latent human desire in people who have gone through the educational system and then university and the career track and have been taught that creativity isn't what they're supposed to do, that there's somebody else who's creative, there's somebody else who's the innovative thinker. And slowly over time, they began to retract just as people and how they show up every day.
Yeah.
And so once I could start to see how the frameworks and the processes that I developed along the way could remind people we are creative, we are innovative thinkers, and give them that like confidence to speak up and do different things and speak differently. That's really something that started the flywheel going on me because I think as a speaker, I don't want to just speak. I want to see that I have an impact and can change how people think and what they think about and what they do and how they show up in the world every day. So that was about 2016 that I started to really focus on creativity and innovation. And since then, that's just really been my big ball rolling down that path and
Yeah.
in helping people like in HR, even attorneys can be creative thinkers and
Yeah. Yeah.
finance people. And now I'm starting to really dig into curiosity. And it's so fun to see how this just connects with so many people on a very basic human level.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also led you to write, is it 10 books you've written
10
now?
books. Yes, 10 books.
Crazy. As
And
somebody
it,
writing as somebody writing his first book, I'm full of awe at somebody who's written 10 books. So
well, I call myself the accidental author because my first book was my master's thesis in university, and a specialty publisher picked it up and published it for me. So I didn't have all the usual angst of, will this get published and what do I do? And then after that, I wrote several corporate histories. One of them is Western Union, which is a pretty well-known company. And then naturally took what I learned there and moved into writing marketing books. And then the last few have been around creativity and innovation. So it's not necessarily that I set out to write the books, but I think I get so excited about what I learn and
Yeah.
read and research that I can't help but want to share it.
Yeah, definitely. So, can you share? I think what might also be interesting for people is like you suddenly started to, okay, I need to talk about innovation, and I know I have a message and I'm excited to give it. So, like sometimes talks like grow over a period of time. Like, can you share a little bit of like, from the first time you spoke about innovation and like what that journey was like and how that talk may changed over a period of time? This is a brand new YouTube channel. It would help me so much if you could subscribe and help me spread the word. You're amazing. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the title of my last book is called Rethink Innovation. And it was called, I don't know, three, four, five, seven different things until it got to that. So I'm really big on iteration and deliver it and iterate and deliver it and iterate and listen to the people in your audience. And people will say, I really liked your speech. Like it really mattered to me. My next question is always, what resonated with you and why? Because it may be the same thing that resonated, but the reason that it resonated can be completely different. And what I found so interesting is sometimes people would say, oh, because what you meant was, and they would share their perspective on it, which was night and day from anything I had ever thought of. But it helped me understand how to expand those concepts. And even before I started to give the speech, I would test a lot of my thinking on social media. In the olden days,
Mhm.
Twitter, and
Yeah.
I don't really use X so much anymore, but I test a lot of my concepts on LinkedIn, and I'll write what I think and see who responds and why. I do polls, and one of them was in my that I used in my last book is management the enemy of innovation? And holy smokes, you talk about throwing gasoline on a fire. But to me, that's great content to really understand what resonates with people because I think as speakers, one of the things we really have an obligation to our audience to do is to help them understand we do understand their problem. Like this isn't me just talking about innovation and overlaying it, you know, without any kind of customization or understanding of an audience. But I think the more we can really understand the audience and their world, the better we can make that speech and continue to iterate it. So it feels like a whole different world what that speech looks like now compared to the early days. But my frameworks and my processes, as once I lock them in, they're always the same. But even with those, I think the workshops and the consulting that I do are really a way to lock in those frameworks to make sure that they work before I use them hardcore into a speech.
Yeah, it's great advice, and it combines, I think, like a few different important points. I think this idea that, yeah, you have a talk and then you really look at, okay, how does the audience respond to that? What do they like? What do they don't like? I normally do the, when are they doing this and taking a photograph of the screen, or are they doing this when? So like you really start to see like, okay, what, and for me it kind of harks to almost like the stand-up comedy thing, that stand-up comedians do exactly the same thing. They'll go to many different comedy clubs and they'll test new things and they'll see, okay, what do people respond to? And maybe I need to say the same joke, but in a different way. And I think it's so good when you do it, even with a business presentation, that yeah, you can learn along the way. Okay, how do I tell that message? Or should it be a different message? Or what questions do people ask? Oh, that's a great question. Let's turn it into a piece of content. So I think it really helps people to understand that they don't have to have a finished perfect thing, but it grows over time as you hone it and you understand what people respond to. So I think it's sound
Yeah.
advice for people.
It's a good one. And I think one of the things that helped me, I think as speakers, it can feel obvious that we need to record ourselves to evaluate it and see how we do. But I think one thing that really helped me was when I flipped the camera and I recorded my audience during that talk.
Ooh.
So yes, I mean, I had gotten familiar enough with myself and how I moved and all of those things. But to your point about where are they holding up their phone, their camera, and when I could see that based on my talk track, and I knew what slide went with every single part of that keynote, that was really eye-opening to see is this as funny to them as I think it is to me? And if not, why
Yeah,
isn't it landing? And I think it's also a little, it surprised me when people laughed at places I didn't expect them to.
yeah,
So then looking into that
yeah,
and see what are they taking pictures of and making sure I don't rush through that to give them the time to savor it and take it in and think about it before moving on.
yeah. Oh, I'm really enjoying the thought of flipping the camera on the audience so you just get to see that. I've never done that, but I'm totally going to because I think it's such a great idea. Because it is, it's like
Good.
it's hard to be in the moment and notice that those kind of things because there's a lot going on in your mind when you're on a stage or just standing up in a meeting room. But yeah, I love that. That's
Yeah,
a
I think there's 2 kinds of people in every audience. One is a person who's always smiling and nodding and makes you feel brilliant. And I think the other one, for whatever reason, is always the one who's, like, dozing off and has their eyes closed. Neither are the right gauge of your content. It's that spectrum in between, and who knows why either one is engaged at that level. But I think it's easy as speakers if we're just scanning the audience, who catches our attention, those can be it, and we don't get a real realistic read on how we're being received.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Oh, there's a whole book to be written on the different types of audience and yeah, the ones that look like they're not engaged but then suddenly wax lyrical about the talk afterwards, or there's a lot of different personality types, or not
That's
like
right.
character types almost, but
Yes. Oh, yes. Like audience archetypes. That's true.
exactly.
That's fun. Yeah.
Okay, so um what what do you think, imagine somebody listening who's thinking, okay, why should I care about doing this? Like, why should I invest the time to do something that's scary and tough and I've got to put myself in a vulnerable position? Like, what kind of benefits has public speaking brought you? Why should people care about it?
I think the biggest thing is that adage that comfort and growth can't coexist. And I think there are a few things that you can pursue in life besides public speaking that will force you to grow in ways that you absolutely positively do not want to deal with. And I think when you stand on stage and you share a message, and to do it well, you have to deal with a lot of your own head trash and maybe some
Mhm.
demons about, are you good enough? Are you smart enough? Like, why should somebody listen to you? What do you know that, like, what could I say that's, Spencer hasn't already said? And I think it helps us understand what really matters to us and why we want to share our message. And then also, what's the uniqueness that I have on my message that maybe is different from yours? So there's a lot of people who speak about creativity and innovation. That's absolutely for sure. And I'm sure a lot of speakers who are way better at it than me. But I look at, like, one of the things that makes me really, really relatable is I go back to that one room schoolhouse kind of place. I grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money in the middle of freaking nowhere. We had to drive 2 hours to go to a mall. And, I'm now sitting on boards. I was the chair of a board with other marketers, like the chief marketing officer of GE and IBM. And you talk about access. I never could have gotten into that room, much less be seen as a leader of a profession by people of professionals of that caliber, had I not dug in and learned what I needed to learn as a speaker and an perpetually learning expert, perpetual student,
Yeah.
had I not been willing to put myself outside of my comfort zone. Because I think once I started to do that, all the other things that used to be so uncomfortable didn't feel so big anymore.
Yeah. Oh, such good advice. I think like and I'll pick at it a little bit that like the imposter syndrome, I think is important for people to understand that you've had it, I've had it, just about everybody who's ever done something like that has had it. And I think it's always remembering that, yeah, your story is unique and you have a unique point of view on that topic, even if there's 100 other people that are going to talk about the same thing. But I think it's just understanding. Like I always remember, like in my very very early days of my career, I used to work in media, and
Wow.
they asked me, or they asked in the office, can somebody volunteer to go talk to some school kids about what it's like to work in the media? So you don't need to, you just need to talk about your experiences. And I was in London, and London, London traffic is horrible. And I was like literally like 5 minutes before the deadline, and this lady was like, "Quick, quick, quick!" And she took me down the side of this hall onto the back of the stage, and I couldn't see the audience because the curtains were drawn. And I sat down next to two people who were like my age now, so they looked like very kind of like experienced, and I was like, I think 23 or something. And the curtains opened, and there was 1,000 people sat in front of me, and I was like, it was the worst moment of my life. I was like, what am I gonna say? Like, I was like looking for like, can I hide under the table or like? And in the end, like what I decided was like, I'm just going to talk as I'm the beginner here. I'm the one who's just started my career, and I can only talk about what it's like to be in your first role. And I had so many comments afterwards that they like got a lot from hearing about what's that first role like, as opposed to 30 years of experience. But so it was a lesson for me to like just understand that, like, yeah, you have a unique point of view that people can find value. It doesn't matter how many other people are talking about it. It doesn't matter any of those things. Is just enjoy your unique experience, because I think that's what connects to people. But it's
Yeah, and I think like in your situation, sometimes we think when we speak, we have to have these like big, super important, thought-provoking things, come out of our mouths over and over and over, just this long succession of them. But I think as you talked, you were so relatable by just being a regular person.
yeah,
And it's oftentimes the stories we tell about the small things in our lives that are really what people can relate to, because with those big, huge, thoughts, that's not something everybody can relate to. But you talking about what's it like to have your first job, and I'm sure you had some pretty interesting stories to share with the
yeah,
audience there too. That's I always think about how can we be as relatable as possible to an
yeah,
audience.
definitely. So if somebody's listening and they're at the beginning of their journey of being a speaker, what would you advise people? How can they get started? What should they think about?
I think there's a couple of things they should think about. One is, what's a topic that they would be excited to talk about for the course of at least several years, and they wouldn't get bored with it. Like they love it enough to be bad at it. And I think that's really where I was when I started talking about creativity and innovation. I was so excited about it and so passionate about it that it didn't matter to me that I didn't get it right every time, or that everything wasn't perfect, because that was just part of the process. And I think my excitement and passion carried me forward in the early years when I didn't have that deep research yet. I was just so excited. I knew everybody could do this, and I wanted them to be excited about it. So I think that's first, is really, really think about what matters to you, not what you think people want to buy, because I think if that were the case, every speaker on earth would be talking about AI.
Yeah,
And and I don't think that's where we're at right now. I mean, there are people that is their thing, but it's definitely not mine. Um, and I think the other thing is that we don't often think about is there are so many opportunities for stories from your everyday life. And really the stories that you tell to emphasize the points that you want to make, that's what people will remember, is the story. I have people tell me over and over and over again, like, will you tell the cigarette butt story, or will you tell the Barbie story? And they can attach it to my framework, but it's the story that they remember, and they specifically ask for me to tell. And these are not big, huge, monumental stories. I mean, one of the stories that I tell in a keynote that I give about curiosity is about when I was a little girl, and I have three older brothers, and highly, highly competitive, from our early ages. And my older brothers, just the fact that they're more experienced. My oldest brother's 10 years older than me. So I was this little girl trying to compete in Monopoly with these very savvy older brothers. And there came this point where I knew I wasn't going to win. So I just grabbed his hotel off a property and ate it. That's about the most simple, basic story, but it took me a long time to think back to, like, what's just the most simple, like a family board game, and the competition around it is pretty relatable to everybody.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's not, some big research thing I had to go do. It just takes time to simply think about the stories that you have in your own everyday life. And there's more there than I think we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, and it makes it so accessible for people. Just write 10 stories from your life that connect to that thing that you care about, and that is the bones of a great speech talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic.
10 lessons from 10 stories from life.
Yeah.
There you go. Whoever's listening, you now have your first speech topic.
Yeah, definitely. And I will keep the person anonymous, but like, there's somebody who taught me years ago that like the way that he does like these big talks is he'll have one or two things that he wants the audience to feel, like to feel that they're more powerful than they think they are or something. And then he'll just tell 10 stories that make them feel that. And I think it's such a it's a very unusual and but powerful way to build a talk. And I think, yeah, I love the idea of this as a beginner. I think it makes it super accessible for people.
That's great. That's great.
So I am conscious of time, and I want to give you a minute to talk about some of your stuff and where people can connect with you. But before that, is there anything else that we haven't spoken about that you'd want to, or any final advice for people in terms of why should they invest in the skill of public speaking?
I think there's a couple of things. One is it will build a network like you never ever imagined possible. And I know we've talked about this with yourself and some of the other speakers in our network, is that we find ourselves at tables and in rooms that we never imagined we had any business being at. And I think that was a huge one for me. And I think the other thing is you get to know what matters to you in a way that you never would have imagined. And I
Mm,
think when whatever our career is, if speaking is just part of what you do, like it was for you early in your career, I think it helps you get to know what you do from a completely different perspective that you never imagined. And I know there were many days in marketing where I'm like, "Ugh, this is the last thing I ever want to do. I wish I had done anything with my career but marketing." But then you go to speak about something and there's like this beautiful fresh perspective and appreciation for what you do that I think we kind of take for granted when we go through our career day by day by day, that when we can pull out and have somebody else give us feedback and perspective, it gives us a fresh look at what we do. And, maybe we aren't so, grumbly when we go to work on some days. There's a different kind of appreciation for
yeah.
it.
So if we want to learn how to love our job, we need to do a talk about it. I love
I
it.
think so. I think we do.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's so true. It's one of the things that I love is every time I learn something new, it also goes into that. Oh, maybe I can talk about it, or you start to connect things in a different way that you wouldn't normally connect. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
totally love it. So how can people connect with you, read your books, find out more about what you do? I'll put whatever you say, I'll put as links below the video so people can connect to it. But where should they go to connect with you?
My website is Carla with a C, carlajohnson.co. There's no M. I say .co for the great state of Colorado because that's where I live and that's where I love to live. And once you're on my site, there is a scroll about halfway down the homepage, and you can sign up for my newsletter called the Rethink Lab, and it comes out every other Tuesday. And in this, I give people a story, a case study, I write a blog, a tool, something along those lines to help them become a better innovator in just 7 minutes a week. So, kind of like speaking, we think it has to be this huge thing. Innovation and creativity can feel that same way. And there's plenty of these tools that I share that only take 7 minutes that will also help you be a better speaker. And then I always like when people connect with me on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I saw you on Spencer's podcast."
Yeah, definitely. So yes, the sign up for the newsletter and go say hello to Carla on LinkedIn, and I'll put the links below so it's easy for you to do. So all that remains is to say thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience. It's been really lovely, and I think there's a lot of gems there for people to take away. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Spencer. It's really been fun to reconnect with you and to talk a little bit more about speaking. You've been a huge supporter of my career along the ways, and I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.